8 on the shot clock. Lost the handle. Got it back. We're in trouble. But Shafino drives it to the right. Down low he goes. Throws it up. Got it! Wow! What a shot!
It is a voice that is distinctive, descriptive, and for generations of IU fans, downright magical. Don Fischer has been the voice that has brought home dramatic last-second game winners.
Here comes Riddell Jones. 3 seconds, 2 seconds. Riddell all the way outside to Watford. 3 on the way. Oh! It went in! It went in! And Indiana wins the ball game!
And national championships.
8 seconds to go. On the Smart, baseline jump shot in the air. Goal! The Hoosiers have won the national championship!
He's come a long way from working at a small-town Illinois train depot and radio stops in places like Butte, Montana, and Ottawa, Illinois, where he describes his first play-by-play experience as historically awful. So bad that his general manager was waiting for him when he returned to the radio station with a message.
You've got 3 weeks. If you aren't better in 3 weeks, you're done. And I said, I appreciate the fact that you're not firing me on the spot, and I'm going to get better.
Rather than feel sorry for himself, he went to work and indeed got better. Don Fischer, the Hall of Fame voice of the Hoosiers, is my guest this week on the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. When Indiana University's football and men's basketball teams enter competition in their upcoming seasons, there will be lots of new names on the rosters. But one thing will remain the same, as it has been for more than a half century: the man behind the microphone. Don Fischer began calling IU football and basketball games in 1973 at the ripe age of 26, more than 2,000 games. And fortunately for all of us, he's showing no signs of slowing down. And I'm very pleased to be joined by a voice that is so recognizable to so many people in Indiana, the voice of Indiana University basketball and football, IU athletics, Don Fischer. Don, thanks for taking the time.
Well, looking forward to it, Gary. Obviously, I'm a big fan, and you guys do such a great job at the Business Journal, and we appreciate everything you do.
I appreciate that, Don. You know, you are a busy guy in the fall. You're a busy guy over the winter months. What's life like for Don Fischer in the summer?
A lot of honeydew catch-up at the beginning.
Right.
And then after that, a lot of golf. I'm up there in age a little bit, as you know, so try to play as much golf as I can in the summertime, and I enjoy it immensely most of the time.
Yeah, I've seen you hit a golf ball. You hit it very well. How's the game as we enter July?
Well, it has gotten better because the beginning was horrific. So it has gotten better, but every day is a different day on a golf course, as you probably know. And if you play very much, you find that out rather quickly. And I had a good day on Saturday and a bad day on Monday. So
yeah, it can be a humbling game, that's for sure.
Yep, I took a day off today.
That's good. Hey, certainly want to get your thoughts on the state of IU basketball and football. We'll do that in a bit, but want to dive into your story because doing a little research, I found out a lot of things, or a number of things, that I wasn't aware of. Very interesting path you took to Indiana University. I think the first thing I didn't know, I just always assumed, I thought you grew up in Indiana, but you're an Illinois native, right?
I am. I grew up in, I was born in Mendota, Illinois, which is northern part of the state, and Rochelle is where I lived a good portion of my younger life and went to high school there and so on. So Mendota and Rochelle were my growing up years until I was 18 years old. And from that point forward, I was, about 19 is when I got into the radio business in a very unusual way at best. But nevertheless, I got into it and found that I enjoyed it, number one. Number two, wanted to be a play-by-play guy, and it's everything that I've ever wanted. And obviously, I've had a chance to to be in a profession that I looked at from a young age, thought, man, that is really cool to what those people are doing. And then I've had a chance to do it for the last 59 years. So yeah, it's been fun.
What was life like growing up in Rochelle? What you like sports, school? What occupied young Don Fischer?
Yeah, well, my stepfather got my brother and I have a twin brother who is a Lutheran pastor. He lives in Salt Lake City, Utah. He's retired, but he's preached like 26 weeks out of the year, each of the last 4 or 5 years anyway, which is he's actually doing exactly what I'm doing. I'm doing exactly what I want to do and nothing else. And he's doing exactly what he loves doing and nothing else. He doesn't have to go to meetings. He just does preaching on Sunday when somebody calls and says, we just sub in, or somebody's sick and that kind of thing. So, but when we were kids, we got involved with Little League Baseball. My stepfather was the coach of the Rotary in our little town of Rochelle, which was about 6,000 people. And you can tell how Little League it was. We had the Rotary, the Kiwanis, the VFW, and the Moose.
Small town USA. Yeah, I love it.
It was the four teams that were in our league, and so we got involved with Little League Baseball and through the years, and then we played all kinds of sandlot things growing up with basketball and football, and we played 2-on-2 baseball games, that kind of thing. You know, when you're kids, you figure out a way to make it fun, and we really had a good childhood in the sense of getting able to do a lot of the things that we like to do. And in those days, it was a different world, and doors weren't locked, and you could ride your bicycle all the way to junior high school and that kind of thing, which was, you know, maybe a half mile away to a mile away, that kind of thing. And it was just a different world, but it was a great world to live in, and we had a lot of really good friends, and the neighborhood was a lot of fun. We had kids that we played with every day.
Yeah, when you talk about life back then and growing up, and you mentioned, you know, 2-on-2 baseball, you know, obviously basketball, you know, sandlot type things. It just seems like that is almost completely lost now. Everything seems so organized, you know, with AAU and all the different things that kids are into in the year-round sports instead of, you know, going from sport to sport.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that, Don? Because I know I don't think it's necessarily that good, but.
Well, we're old people, I guess.
Right. Get off my lawn, right?
It tells you exactly where we're at in our thinking process. And I agree 100%. I don't think it's good. I think organization is a good thing, but it shouldn't be that way every day of the year. And unfortunately for kids today, these kids are on travel teams, or they're on teams that go to tournaments every weekend. I think today you can get burnt out on sports as much as you can anything else, instead of making your own games in the backyard. And my kids all grew up playing baseball in the yard, our backyard, and the next neighbor's backyard, you know,
right.
And doing football games and that kind of thing. And they kind of lived like we did. But today kids, they don't have the same life that we had back in those days. And it was a much more innocent time, I think. But at the same time, I think today's kids are involved with sports. Many of them play multiple, but most of them get involved with one thing, and that's what they concentrate on. And, you know, as you get older and you progress get into high school and so on, you don't really know what you're the best at that point.
Right.
And you're still trying to experiment. And today it doesn't seem like kids get an opportunity to do that with too many different things. And that's probably the one thing I think most kids miss out on today that we had a good fortune to be a part of.
Yeah. You mentioned your twin brother who became a minister, and that was, I know, and again, doing a little research, you said he knew what he wanted to do from an early age. And while you were doing what you wanted to do, you didn't necessarily know that you wanted to get into radio, right into broadcasting at an early age.
No, I didn't. I was the black-hearted child of the twosome of my brother and I. I had no idea what I really wanted to be. I didn't like school very much. I did well enough to pass in just about everything that I was involved with, but I never worked at anything all as hard as my brother did. And my brother in 7th grade knew he wanted to be a pastor. I mean, he had made that decision in his life at that early age. And so he had a vision and all that kind of thing. And I had none. I was a scatterbrained dude and was a little bit of a rebel type guy to some degree. But the fact of the matter is, I love sports. And after I got out of high school, I'm thinking, I don't want to go to college. I don't, like I said, I didn't like school all that much. And And now what am I going to do? And, I thought about coaching. Well, if you're going to be a coach, you got to go to school. You got to go to college. And so I started knocking around at different jobs, and I ended up at the railroad depot in Mendota, Illinois, which was 30 miles south of Rochelle. And I was in the depot one night, and I'd started a shift 9 o'clock at night till 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, talk about that, because I remember seeing something on that. You had a crazy shift, and you worked like that shift like every day for 7 months, right?
I did. I had one day off in 7 months' time, because when I took the job, the guy that hired me said, "Look, it's going to be a couple, 2 or 3 weeks before we find somebody to do weekends here, but when we do, then you'll just have the 5-day shift." Well, that happened 7 months later. But and the truth of the matter is, it was crazy. And I was 9 at night till 6 o'clock in the morning, so I had no social life for the most part. And I was making a little bit of money, which was better than I was in the previous jobs that I had, which included selling door-to-door magazines and working for an insurance company that got embezzled after 3 months' time. And I worked at a couple of factories and those kind of things. So long story short, it didn't take me long to figure out that I really needed to find something that I wanted to do. And I'm sitting in the depot one night. This is about 3 or 4 months in to my workload. And I pick up Sport Magazine during my lunch break, and on the back inside cover, there's a full-page ad that says, "How would you like to be a sportscaster?" And I went, you know what? I think maybe I could do that. And so it was an ad for Career Academy in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It was a home correspondence course of all things. And so I signed up for it. $845 later, and halfway through it, I got my first radio job. But the thing about it was, the home correspondence course, you got your lessons in a workbook and on a record album. They sent you 20 record albums, and you'd have somebody talking on the record album, and here's how you do this, and here's how you do that, and here's how your newscast should sound, and those kinds of things.
Wow.
And the tape recorder they were giving you a tape recorder that probably cost them $34, and literally 3 3/4 speed. If I don't know, Gary, if you even know what that is.
Yeah.
But it's about one of the slowest recordings you could possibly imagine. And you did your lessons, the voice part of your lessons, on that tape recorder, sent them to Career Academy, and you had a gentleman that would grade them and talk about, and then send you a tape back and tell you what you did right, what you did wrong. Most everything I did was wrong. But at the same time I started that program, I went up to the local radio station in Mendota, and I said to these guys, they had local FM. It was a small FM station, not a big signal or anything like that. And I asked the program director, whose name was Art Mann, I said, "Do you have any problem if I come in after my shift at 6 o'clock in the morning and just watch you guys for a couple of hours each day, just to kind of figure out what radio's all about, because I've started this correspondence course, blah, blah, blah." And they said, "Sure, no problem." Well, I became their gopher. In fact, I woke up the morning guy about half the time to get him out of bed to sign on at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was the truth. He wasn't there half the time when I pulled up. So at any rate, I actually drove him to the radio station a couple of times, because he'd been out a long night for him the night before. So, but that's where I started, and I got a real feel for radio in that small town radio station, and I knew it was going to take me time to get where I needed to go. And I met a guy there, and again, this is a long story, but I'll shorten as best I can. Yeah. Met a guy named Chuck Kenworthy at the station. He moved on about a month after I met him. He went to DeKalb, Illinois, and then we kept in touch. And I got about halfway through this correspondence course. So this is about 6, 7 months in. And all of a sudden, he's saying, I called him up one day in DeKalb, but he wasn't there. And I said, "Well, where'd Kenworthy go?" And he goes, "Well, he went to Butte, Montana." I said, "Butte, Montana? From Mendota, Illinois?" He goes, "Yep, he went to Butte, Montana." So anyway, I called him up in Butte, Montana. I said, "Why did you go to Butte?" He goes, "Well, I want to get into television, and the radio station out there is combined with the television operation. So the company is a radio television, well, believe this or not, their facility was in a railroad depot."
Oh, perfect.
It was a huge depot that they had in Butte, Montana, but it wasn't part of the railroad anymore. But the radio station and TV operation was now based in this railroad depot. Anyway, long story. I interviewed for the job. actually took a train and went out to Butte, Montana to interview for this job that Chuck Kenworthy had gone into because he called me up 2 weeks later. I'm sorry I'm going so fast here because I want to get this out of the way because
You're good. This is funny, though. This is good stuff.
So at any rate, he calls me up one day and he says, look, they've got an opening here for a nighttime DJ. And I said, really? And I said, but I'm only about halfway through this correspondence course. He said, it may not matter. They're just looking for somebody, a body to fill the position. And I said, well, what is the shift? And he goes, 9 at night till 6 in the morning. And I said, really? And he goes, yep. He says, 9 o'clock to midnight, you're a DJ. From midnight to 3, you're the janitor. And from 3 o'clock till 6 o'clock, you are the farm director, for God's sakes. So at any rate, I literally took a train ride, 48 hours, Butte, Montana, went out there, interviewed for the job, came back, thought there was no chance they were going to hire me. And a week later, I get a call from Chuck Kenworthy, and he goes, they want you out here, and they want you as soon as you can get here. And I went to Butte, Montana, and that was my first radio job.
Wow. But you wanted to do play-by-play, and this wasn't play-by-play, right? How did you get that entree into the play-by-play game?
Well, I went to a lot of the games in Butte, Montana with the sports crew because they did do high school football and basketball games out there. And so I went with the Don Tuggle, who was the program director, their play-by-play guy, and a guy named Tim Kalman, who was the sales manager for the radio station, and he was the color analyst. Both these guys drank like fish. And honestly, they wanted me to drive most of the trips because, and in Butte, Montana, you were going someplace, you had to go about 100 miles for your first football game. I mean, that's the honest to God truth. Yeah. We went to Anaconda, Montana, and after that, it was the first game I did. This is like September 7th, 8th, someplace in that neighborhood. Believe it or not, it snowed that night.
Wow.
Now, Butte, Montana and Anaconda and those kind of places, you know, they have some issues like that every now and then. Butte's one of the coldest places in the country in the wintertime. Anyway, we did a ball game out there. After the ball game, I drove them to a bar, and we went in this bar, and the bar had no stools, just a bar, and spittoons about every 5 steps down the barway, and it was a dirt floor. So that was my first experience with play-by-play guys. And, of course, I didn't drink at the time. I was still too young. I wasn't even 21 yet.
Wow.
So at any rate, long story, I literally got back. It was about a year and a half later, I decided I'm not going to find a sportscasting job in this area. I've got to go back home and back into Illinois where they had a lot of small-town radio stations that all did high school sports. And so that's exactly what I did. Got back there, got a job in Ottawa, Illinois, lied to get the job. Not proud of it, but I lied to get the job, told them I'd done play-by-play in Butte, Montana, and I hadn't. And 2 months after I got there and was on the air as a DJ and that kind of thing at this radio station in Ottawa, was my first opportunity to do a football game. Well, I did my first football game, and it was historically one of the worst in the history of radio. I was absolutely horrible. And I literally the radio station that I worked for signed off at 10 o'clock at night. And we got done with the game at 9:30, and I drove around town for an hour and a half after the game so I wouldn't have to see anybody at the radio station because I did not want to face anybody after that performance. I got back to the radio station to dump off the equipment at about 11 o'clock, and who's standing in the doorway when I get there? The general manager who had hired me. And he said, when I walked in the door, he goes, I thought you told me you'd done play-by-play before. And I said, Mr. Porso, I said, I apologize for that, but I thought if I told you I had never done play-by-play, you wouldn't have hired me. Yeah. And he said, no blank. And obviously he was really upset. And he goes, you've got 3 weeks. If you aren't better in 3 weeks, you're done. And I said, I appreciate the fact that you're not firing me on the spot, and I'm going to get better. And I went home that night, got up the next morning, said, what am I going to do? And I called a guy named Art Kimball, who was the play-by-play voice of LaSalle Peru High School. Really good play-by-play guy, had been around a long time. And I said, Mr. Kimball, you don't know me, but I've got my first job. I did a really poor job of my first football game. I sucked. And I said, is there any chance you could give me some insights? And he said, what are you doing? And I said, what do you want me to do? And he goes, come to my house tomorrow at noon. And he said, we'll talk. And so I went to his home, and he spent 5 hours with me on a Sunday afternoon.
Wow.
Told me all the things that he did and how he prepared, how he did interviews. how he did stat sheets, how he worked because in most small towns, you don't have a color analyst. If you do, you're lucky, and you start out doing everything on your own. And he gave me all the insights that I needed, told me who I should talk to get stats and those kinds of things at the high schools and who to work with. And then I took like copious notes. And I literally, what I learned from that guy in that 5-hour period of time is what I've used my entire career.
Wow.
And Art Kimball, incidentally, has something named for him at DePaul University here in Greencastle.
No kidding.
He went to college at DePaul and then went on to a very distinguished radio career. And I think he is either his picture's on the wall there. I've got to go see it because I got a grandkid that now is at DePaul. So I'm going to see what he was involved with. But Mr. Kimball passed away several years ago. And he was just a tremendous mentor to me, obviously. And I talked to him several times through the years, and we had a great relationship. And in fact, the night that I was inducted into the Indiana Broadcasters Hall of Fame, my son told me that he had passed away that week.
Oh, wow.
Had not heard it. And so I was pretty emotional that night that I got that award. I was sitting there blubbering as the tears were coming down my cheeks because I knew that man was responsible for my career.
Wow, special guy. So in terms of a big break, you got going on the play-by-play routine and made a trip to Terre Haute, right? WBOW, Terre Haute, and that's where it sounds like that's where you really began to hone your craft.
Well, when I got there, they wanted me to be the sports director. The guy that hired me was a guy named Joe Tate. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
Sure.
Voice of the Cleveland Cavaliers, years and years. And Joe Tate hired me to take his place. He was from Amboy, Illinois, believe it or not, which is about 10 miles from Mendota. And his mom and my mom knew each other. I had never heard of Joe. And I worked with him one time when I was in Ottawa. And that's how I got a connection with him. And then I found out that he was leaving to go from Terre Haute to either the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Pittsburgh Penguins. He was going to do ice hockey or he was going to be a play-by-play man for basketball. And he left that station and I called him up and I asked him if there was anything open at BOW. And he said, yeah, I'm leaving. He said,
wow. Yeah.
That was his first gig in the NBA was the Cleveland Cavaliers in their very first year of existence. And he got that job. And he hired me to take his place in Terre Haute. And from that point forward, I was doing right at 175 play-by-play games a year. We did stuff that you can't believe. Junior football out of the back of a pickup truck with a Marty unit that people don't know what that is, but it's a little bit.
Oh yeah.
It's basically something. It's a piece of equipment that you literally can get about 5 miles away from the radio station. You wouldn't be able to hear it. But we were 3 miles away in the park that these kids played in, and we were doing games out of there. And I was doing it with a guy that was a blind judge in Terre Haute, and he built this junior program. His name was Jim Lewis.
I remember. See, I grew up in Clinton, Indiana.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. So, and I went to Indiana State. So I'm familiar. Yeah. Jim Lewis. I remember Judge Lewis. Yeah.
And he was pretty much blind. He was obviously legally blind.
Yeah.
And he had started that program there, and he was my color analyst because I'd talk about the play-by-play of the game or whatever the case, and he would pop in there and say, yeah, little Johnny, his mom and dad are sitting up there and all this kind of stuff. It was such a great learning experience, and I got to do so many things there. It was the last year of Gersmeyer, Garfield, Wiley, and Honey Creek. Those schools combined to make two high schools, Terre Haute North and Terre Haute South, which is still today. But there was West Vigo, there was Schulte, there was state school. We did play-by-play for all those schools: football, basketball, baseball. We did the Vigo County Fairgrounds dirt track races that were.
Wow, you did it all.
Yeah, we were doing so many different things. I actually did 2 years of the final hole of the Terre Haute City Championship, golf championship. We were at the end of the 18th hole and watched them come up. You could see see them tee off and see where they hit the ball, that kind of thing. We did golf. I mean, we did so many things. It was so cool. And that's where I honed most of my opportunities as a play-by-play guy to get better.
Yeah. Well, I know you moved back. I think BOW got rid of sports, right?
Yes. Yeah, Roger Newhoff bought the radio station from the people that owned it, and he decided that the FM was going to be music intensive. This is 1972, And, that's when FM was really starting to become something big in the sense of music and that kind of thing and the sound and everything. And we did all our play-by-play on that radio station on the FM side.
Wow.
Because it was simulcast when we weren't doing it.
Yep.
So that's the reason that I left there and went back to Ottawa, Illinois, believe it or not, for 8 months, because at the end of the football season in Terre Haute that year, they stopped sports.
Yep.
And so I left, went back to Ottawa. I literally got a job with the guy who was the first guy I worked with as a program director. There was a guy named Jim Frandon. He was now the general manager there. And I called him up and I said, "You got anything that I might be able to do over the rest of this winter?" I said, "Because I've just got kicked out of a job with the station in Terre Haute." And he goes, "Sure, come up here. We got a high school kid doing football and basketball games. He's got a great voice, but he doesn't know what he's doing, and you can teach him." And so I literally went up there and worked with this kid for that winter. And then I started applying for jobs in the spring of that year and of 1973. And lo and behold, this job opened up in Indianapolis. I was talked to by my former general manager, Harvey Glore in Terre Haute, who called me up and said, "Had you applied for the job there?" I said, "Didn't know it was open." He says, "Well, let me call the general manager." His name was Don Nelson. I don't know if you remember him or not, but he was a terrific manager. At any rate, Don Nelson told this guy, "Look, yeah, we're still taking tapes and resumes." And Harvey calls me up and he said, "Yeah, they'll take your tape and resume. That's the good news." I said, "What's the bad news then?" He goes, "There are 270 other guys that applied for the job." I said,
Wow.
"Are you kidding me?" And he said, "Yep." So at any rate, I sent a tape and a resume, and believe it or not, I got interviewed and they hired me.
Well, we'll talk much more about that, getting the IU job, your introduction to Bob Knight, and the state of IU basketball and football. That's when the Business and Beyond podcast returns. Stay with us.
At PNC Bank, we're committed to making a difference in the lives of our customers and communities by helping them move forward financially. As a Main Street bank, we try to do right by our customers with every encounter. Our local teams offer personalized financial advice to help guide you in making the best decision. We're proud to be part of your community. PNC Bank. See how we can make a difference for you at pnc.com. Copyright 2022, the PNC Financial Services Group, Inc., all rights reserved.
Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week is the voice of Indiana University athletics. He's been at it for more than 5 decades, Don Fischer. And Don, the first part of the podcast, really a great synopsis of kind of how you got to Indiana University. You mentioned that call you got from a former GM that kind of connected you. 275 or so applicants for this job, and you got the job. What were your thoughts? Because you're an Illinois guy, really didn't know much about IU, right?
Yeah, I did not. I mean, when we were doing Indiana State games and things like that, we weren't playing Indiana University. So, I wasn't as in tune to IU as everybody else in the state probably were. I was trying to hone a career at this point, and I was doing so many high school football, basketball, baseball games along with Indiana State and Rose-Hulman, those kinds of things. So I wasn't that familiar with IU. I literally the year before we did the state championship in Illinois in 1972, the basketball championship, and in between games, I went to a sporting goods store just to look around to kill time that afternoon, and they had a TV on in there, and Indiana was playing in the national championship game against UCLA.
Yeah.
And Steve Downing, everybody knows, fouled out of that game. I actually saw that play on television in a sporting goods store in Champaign, Illinois.
Wow. Yeah.
But that was my first time I'd really had any touch base with Indiana University for the most part. Didn't know anything about Bob Knight, and obviously when I got hired, I found out a lot very quickly. But it was like I said, the opportunity to do Indiana University, I was given that opportunity. I took advantage of it. But the first game, I could have got fired. And I don't know if you've heard this story or not, but I literally, the first broadcast that I didn't realize I was doing this. I said University of Indiana 3 times in the first half. And I guess the phones at the radio station lit up like a Christmas tree because it's not University of Indiana, it's Indiana University. And people are so sensitive about that at that time. I don't know if they still are or not, but I don't think anybody like me has made that mistake since. But I did make that mistake, and I got a phone call at halftime. They called, no cell phones at that time. They called the university and said, "You better tell that guy that it's not University of Indiana." And so I found out at halftime. And here's the thing: Max Skirvin, who had done the play-by-play prior to me, knew that. And he had been there for 6 years as their play-by-play guy. And he was not exactly pleased that I was the new play-by-play guy, but he ended up being my color analyst. And he still hadn't told me at halftime, but I got the word. And the next thing you know,
kind of left you swinging out there, huh?
Yeah, he did. And I laugh about it now, but back at the time I was really ticked.
Yeah,
because
I'll bet. What was that like? That had to be kind of tough with you taking his job. He remained in the booth, right, with you?
He did. He remained as the color analyst, and the university wanted him to be the analyst because Max works for the Alumni Association, and he traveled all over the state to the alumni clubs and things like that. Had meetings with these groups, and they wanted him to continue his familiarity with all those different people, and this was a good opportunity for him to do that and still be a part of the broadcasts. And that's the way the university worked it out with WIRE and Cramful Advertising, who actually had both Indiana and Purdue at that time. I think they were responsible as the true owners of the networks at that point in time. But Indiana's Wire was given both football and basketball on radio to do at Indiana. And I think I'm trying to remember, it was John DeCamp, I think, was doing the Purdue play-by-play.
Purdue, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah,
on radio. So at any rate, yes, that's how that all played out. Trying to remember here off the top of my head what we were talking about at the end before I got sidetracked there. But at any rate, long story. The truth of the matter is, the opportunity that I was given at that point in time, I was a part of the most successful part of Indiana basketball in the history of the program.
Yeah.
Bob Knight was absolutely phenomenal, and without question, one of the toughest guys to deal with a media guy that you've ever been around. So,
well, tell a story, because obviously you're doing football and basketball as well. You had not met Bob Knight, and there was I think it was like a tip-off luncheon at the Columbia Club, right?
Yes,
and
sir.
you were introduced to. Tell that story, because that had to be interesting.
Well, Don Luft was given to me as my spotter for football games, and Don was the president at that time of the IU Varsity Club, and he worked with Max before, and Max knew him really well, and so I was introduced to Don, and he became my spotter the first year I was there, and he actually did it for several years after that. But the truth of the matter was, I had met Coach Knight, and I met Lee Corso way back at the beginning of football and all that kind of thing. And Corso was a delight to work with, without question. He was one of the funnier guys you're ever going to meet. He had all this energy and everything, as everyone knows, and you see him on game day and those kinds of things back when he wasn't kind of struggling with his health issues and those kinds of things. But he was so much fun to work with, and I was looking forward to working with Coach Knight. But I had also heard that he might have a little bit more temperamental than Coach Corso was. So at any rate, I hadn't met him, and Don Luft said, "Let's go to the Columbia Club. They're having a tip-off luncheon there before basketball season starts, and he'll speak to the group there." And he says, "I'll introduce you to him after the thing's over with." He gathers up Max Skirvin. They pick me up in Indianapolis. We go to the Columbia Club. We watch Bob Knight wow the crowd. This is his third season, 1973. And he gets up there, gets done with his speech, and everybody's standing ovation, all those kinds of things. He's asked to stick around for a couple of minutes, sign some autographs, take some pictures, and we just hung out. Max Skirvin, Don Luft, and I sat there at the table and waited for him to get done. And finally, the last person came up, and Knight thanked them for being there and signed an autograph or whatever. And Don Luft says, Coach, he says, before you leave, he says, "Come on over here." So Knight walks over, he sees Max, and we're standing there as a threesome. And Lufty goes, he says, "Coach, I want you to meet the new play-by-play voice of the Indiana Hoosiers here. This is Don Fischer." So I stick out my hand. He puts his hand out. He shakes my hand. He doesn't say welcome or anything like that. Doesn't say a word to me. He just puts his arm around Max and walks away.
Oh,
I was getting to show. I was
little
immediately
uncomfortable.
shown- yeah, I was immediately shown who was the boss of this grouping. So, yeah, it was a very interesting way to meet Coach Knight, and it took a couple of years for him to warm up to me. But after that, we had a great relationship in the sense of professional relationship. I should
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. How did it work? You know, a lot of attention. You see a lot of bloopers with Coach Knight and Chuck Marlowe over the years, certainly. But you did all the pregame or many of the pregame shows or interviews and those types of things. What was that like? I mean, were there any, shall we say, interesting moments over the course of time?
Well, there were a lot of interesting moments. I mean, in the first couple of years, it was tough because he wasn't, 73, Indiana ties for the Big Ten championship with Michigan. And this is 73-74 season I'm speaking of now. And they tie for the championship, and they have to play a playoff game, and they play it in Champaign. Indiana gets beat by Michigan in that ball game in a tightly contested contest, and Indiana is not the Big Ten champion. Therefore, they're not going to the NCAA tournament. But that's the year that they had the CCA tournament. That was the first year of the CCA tournament, Collegiate Commissioners Association tournament, which Bob Knight said, I don't want to play in it. And the reason he didn't want to play in it, he thought this Collegiate Commissioners Association was trying to run the NIT out of business. And he loved the NIT because the NIT had taken care of him when he was at Army, and he played in the NIT several years there. So at any rate, he was not pleased at all, but the university was obligated because Wayne Duke was the commissioner of the Big Ten, and he had basically said, yeah, we're in. Big Ten's in on the Collegiate Commissioners Association tournament. So the second place team in the league would go to that tournament each year. It only lasted 2 years, incidentally, here. It was Indiana the first year, and I'm trying to remember who won it the second year. I can't remember now off the top of my head. But Indiana played in it because Indiana was forced to. Knight got kicked out of the championship game, and Indiana still won. They beat USC in the title game. You just played 3 games in that tournament.
Yeah.
And Indiana won the 3 games that they played. And that was the first year I was there, and everything was he got kicked out of the ball game at about 10 minutes into the first half. Went up in the stands. The game was played in St. Louis. He went up in the stands and sat there and watched his team play the rest of the ball game. You were supposed to be out of the arena if that happened. You were supposed to either be in the locker room. You were not supposed to be in the stands. He sat in the stands, but he got booted on purpose.
Yeah, on purpose. That's great. That's great.
There were so many different things, Gary, with him though. He didn't want to do a talk show. Yeah, for up until 1981, we did not do a talk show, and I had bugged him a couple times during those years. Coach, a lot of coaches are doing this talk show stuff now, and you might want to do it. It'll be an hour, it'll be your time on a Wednesday night or a Monday, whatever you designate the best night for you. And so at any rate, all of a sudden in the summer of 81, I get a phone call. And it's from Bob Knight. And when he wanted something, he called me Fisho. He
knew he wanted something when he called you Fisher, huh? Okay.
If he called me Fisho, I was in good. It was going to be something he wanted me to do or something he wanted me to take care of. So at any rate, he goes, Fisho, what do you think about us doing a talk show? I went, Coach, I've asked you about this about 5 times over the last several years. You didn't want to do it. He says, well, let's talk to your general manager and see how much you'll pay me. And what he found out about these coaches that were doing talk shows, and Dean Smith was the guy he talked to, and Dean Smith was making $30,000 a year just doing these talk shows, like 15 talk shows, 1 hour a night for a week during the football or during the basketball season. And literally, that's what Knight, when he found out that's exactly what he wanted. He wanted to get $30,000 or $40,000, whatever it was going to take. And obviously he did. And that's when we started doing these talk shows. And that's when things really got crazy. Yeah. Because Knight was on those shows, he was either in a great mood or he was in a jocular mood. And when he was in a jocular mood, you could expect almost anything.
Yeah. Anything stick out to you? Any stories that you can remember that were?
Well, there are a couple. And I'll tell you the 2 that would stick out more than any other. The first one was one night we get to about halfway through the show. It's time to take a commercial break. We break for the commercial. Bob's been good at that point, and we take the commercial break. It's 3 minutes long. When we come back, I say, well, welcome back to Bob Night Live. I think that's what we called it at the time. I said, Coach, blah, 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 what do you think about this upcoming ball game with whoever we were going to play? And I get no response. It's like dead air. And I said, Coach, Bob, Coach, are you there? Toilet flushes. He stuck the microphone up to the toilet and flushed the toilet. So I have no idea if he actually did what his duty was at that point or not. All I know is, and of course, I burst out laughing because I got nothing else I can do. Right. At this point, right. What am I going to do? Coach, that's awful. I'm not going to say that. So at any rate, I laugh. He starts laughing. And of course, we have a good time the rest of the show. So that was the first one. The second one was toward the end of the talk shows. This was 97 or 98, someplace in there. And by this time, and here's the other thing. During these talk shows, he had a microphone. He sat on the couch next to him. We had a microphone, that you could hook up to your collar or whatever the case may be. He wouldn't wear it. So he would stick it on the side of the couch. And half the time you couldn't hear his response to stuff because he's always screwing around doing something else. So, it was always something going on with the talk show. One night he took a shower in commercial break. And so he came back, and now I'm doing the show in Indianapolis. He's doing the show from his locker room. That's where he did the show from. And literally, he knew what he was doing. He was toweling off. We're doing
during the show, during the commercial break. Yeah,
exactly. But in the later years, he was doing it from his home. And he would get to his house at 7 o'clock. And the show started at 7:05. He'd get to his house at 7 o'clock or thereabouts. He'd sit down. And he would start dinner because his wife would be making him dinner at that point, and he would be eating his dinner for the first 10 minutes of the show, answering questions with his mouth full. I mean, it was those kinds of things that he did. But the funniest one of all, one night, and he had a phone that he could sit in a cradle so that it was basically, he didn't have to touch the phone. He was just sitting there eating or whatever he was doing. So he takes this thing during a commercial break out into his garage. And he starts working on a shotgun in his garage. He's got a concrete floor, and he's got the shotgun in a vise. Because I asked him about this after the fact.
Yeah.
Because I'm not seeing it at that time. But he's answering a question, and apparently while he's doing something with the shotgun, he releases the barrel of the shotgun, and it slams on the concrete floor. It sounded like a gun going off almost.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
And he goes, O-S.
Yeah.
H-I-E. And then I had to write letters to all our radio affiliates because everybody's ticked off because he used that word.
You got it on the air. Yeah. Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things that you did. And those are just a couple of the standout scenarios, but there were so many different times. We did a pregame show one time where we were over in Champaign, Illinois. He's laying in a canopied bed. This hotel that they were staying at was, I can't remember the name of it, but it had a canopy bed and he had a canopy bed. So I go in, he's laying in the bed, propped up with a pillow behind him, and he's got a plastic solo cup, basically a plastic solo cup, and he's eating grapes with seeds in them. And we start the show, and he's eating these grapes, and I said, Coach, you want to stop eating grapes? No, just go on, Fisher, get it done. So I basically and he starts spitting the seeds while he's answering a question.
So you can hear him spitting the seeds.
Yeah. He spits the seeds in the end of the solo cup, and it's plastic, so you can hear every one of them hit. I mean, it was that kind of thing you were dealing with. But what were you going to do? You know?
Yeah.
This is the most successful college basketball coach at that juncture in history, and he was able to do whatever he wanted to do, and you had to deal with it.
One of a kind, to be sure. Well, final question on Coach Nutt. Your thoughts on how things played out. Obviously, there was the departure and going to Texas Tech, came back. There was the reunion a few years ago, very emotional for a lot of people. As you watched all of, because you witnessed everything. I mean, from the beginning, your time there, as you said earlier, the most successful run in IU history, and witnessed it all. What was your thoughts as that played out in the later years with Coach Knight?
Well, to me, it was the saddest part of his life. I mean, I've never met a person that I thought was more well-read than he. It was absolutely amazing. I think he had a photographic memory. I really do. And he could read, he'd read those Chinese books about war and all those kinds of things. These things are like bigger than any dictionary you've ever seen, that kind of thickness. And he would read those things, and he was brilliant in everything that he did. He wanted, had to be his way, but he wanted it perfect.
Yeah.
As best he could get, as perfect as he could get, whatever he did. And he was a perfectionist without question. He was a guy that put up with no nonsense. And if you didn't like what he was saying and you voiced your opinion, you were quickly shut out the door because it was his way or the highway, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I respected him. I respected so much what he did as a college basketball coach. To this day, I would tell you that I still think he's the best college basketball coach ever. I don't think anybody has proven me wrong in that context, and there have been some great ones. And I'm not saying that Mike Krzyzewski wasn't a great coach, because he certainly was. But I've never seen anybody with the pure coaching ability and who could do all the different things that coaches are expected and want to do. And I've never seen anybody better at the things he did as a coach.
Yeah. Do you think Coach Knight, and there are others in this category too, could coach in today's environment? With NIL and the portal and all this stuff.
No, I think that would have, if Coach Knight had coached up to the point where we got into the NIL and the transfer portal, I don't think he'd be coaching today. Yeah. I don't think he could deal with it. He'd never take an NBA job, because he said, those guys would be making more money than me, and they wouldn't listen to a thing I said. Yeah. And he said, I'd never take an NBA job, and he never did. Yeah. But the saddest part of this whole thing, Gary, is that the man passed with dementia or Alzheimer's, whatever you want to call it, and didn't have the mind that was so brilliant, everything that he had accomplished, and he never got the final days of his life to enjoy that part of it. Yeah. And that's sad.
Yeah. Yeah. Fast forward to 2024, as you look at, first of all, IU basketball, a lot of new players coming in, a lot of anticipation for the next season. Give us your take on the state of IU basketball.
Well, obviously, Coach Woodson had to get into the portal this year big time, and he did. He did what he had to do. Obviously, he got Indiana back in the NCAA tournament a couple of years in a row there. Not as far as people wanted him to go, that kind of thing. And then last year really did not have a great year by any stretch of the imagination. They had injuries that cost them, no question about that. And they did get a little bit of a winning streak going at the end of the season, but it was a little too late. And then he got in the portal, and he's done a magnificent job of getting 5 players in the portal, and then he's got a McDonald's All-American that was still available out there that came, Bryson Tucker. And what he did in the portal is pretty special. Now, the question is, can he put it all together, and will these guys coalesce and become a chemistry, with the kind of chemistry that you have to have if you're going to be a championship team? Yeah. And already there are people talking like, well, Indiana's got the tools to be a Big Ten champion. That's in some of the articles that you read these days and everything else. So there are a lot of expectations. There's no question about that. And Mike, I think, is a really good basketball coach. But right now, the heat's on. There's no question about that, because people are expecting this team to be better than some people might think it will be.
Yep, a lot of expectations, anticipation, I guess, on the football side, which will be kicking off literally before too long. New coach, Kurt Cignetti, right?
Yep.
Energy guy. He puts it out there. What are your thoughts for IU football coming into this season?
I can tell you, Gary, that I haven't been this excited about IU football since Terry Hepner.
Wow.
And I thought Terry Hepner, if he would not have passed because of the brain tumor that killed him in his second year, after his second year, I think Terry Hepner would have turned this program around. It wouldn't be anything like what we've seen over the last several years.
Yeah.
But I think Curt Cignetti is the guy that can do the same thing. I watched 10 of his 13 spring practices, including their scrimmage and the scrimmages that they had. I missed one scrimmage, I think, and 2 other practices besides that. I saw the rest of them. I wanted to see what this guy was all about, and I am totally bought into Curt Cignetti. I think this guy really knows what he's doing. He's never had a losing season. I watched how he coached on the sidelines and practices so far this year. He is the most organized coach we've had in a long, long time. He understands exactly what he's looking for. He has a system. He believes in that system. He brought 6 of his coaches with him from James Madison, where they were ranked 25th in the country at the end of last year. And these guys took off running, and they did a phenomenal job in the transfer portal, got 29 players out of the portal. And many of these guys were starters at the respective schools that they played at. And, of course, a lot of them were James Madison players who followed him to Indiana after the success that he had at James Madison. So what I saw in the spring, I was totally bought into. And I think this is going to be a year that people are going to remember because it's going to be the first under Curt Cignetti. I think it's that.
Yeah. What's next for Don Fischer? I mean, you show certainly no signs of what is this year coming up? You're 52.
52.
52.
Yep.
No signs of slowing down. You're looking great health, great energy. What are your thoughts going forward?
Well, that's all up to the good Lord. You know, you've got to have your health. That's the main thing. You got to have your voice, and you got to have your brain. And I don't know that I've got all of that still going for me, but you know, at this point, I'm still enjoying what I'm doing, Gary. I just do the football games and the basketball games and the talk shows with the 2 coaches. And that's all I've got work-related wise to do at this point. So I've got plenty of time to prepare. And I have slowed a little bit. There's no question about that. We all do when you get to be 77 or 78 years old. But I still feel good at this point. And as long as I'm healthy and my wife tells me I'm not blubbering on the air, we'll be good.
Well, that is good news for IU fans and sports fans in general. Don, it's been a real treat to chat with you. You know, the word icon is thrown around a lot, but in terms of a broadcasting icon, you're certainly one of those. And appreciate your work and appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Well, I appreciate your having me, Gary. As always, it's always a pleasure to work with you.
All right, and thank you for tuning in to this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. It's a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can download all of our episodes and get Indiana business news 24/7 at InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.